Tēnā koutou katoa. Food is sexy. Farming maybe less so. I believe that we should be introducing ourselves as food producers rather than farmers. Can I acknowledge the Minister here this afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and can I praise Rabobank for a fantastic day today. Thank you very much for putting it on and for giving me the opportunity to address you all this afternoon. I'm a proud dairy producer and politician, and in New Zealand we produce enough food to feed about 40 million people. Here in Australia it's about 75 million people. And both countries pride themselves on doing the right thing for the environment. Sustainable farming practices and of course producing safe food that goes around the world. And I've been asking a few Kiwi farmers earlier on today, how do you think you rate our environmental performance? As the Aussies say, across the ditch, mate. And the Kiwi farmers have been saying, oh, it's sort of somewhere around between 6 and 8, so I'm going to call that about 7. So we've got still a wee way to go. 98% of our water bodies in New Zealand are excluded from cattle, which is fantastic, and our farmers have done that in a voluntary capacity over the last 15 years. There's 1.2 million hectares of Indigenous forests on our sheep and beef farms. Of course, what our food producers like is policy certainty. And if we look back to our present government, who recently made a decision to ban oil and gas exploration in New Zealand, our industry now is wondering, could we be next? And I hope not, but we need to get out there and tell our story better than what we are currently doing. Can I spend just a moment talking about climate change, because it's very topical in New Zealand right now. We have a zero carbon bill coming into the Parliament probably in the next month or two to try and reach our commitments of 2050. And the National Party that I proudly represent have 5 bottom lines. The first one is that all decisions need to be science-based. The second one is that we need long-term incentives. The third one, we need to be at pace with our global trading partners. Following by new technologies are going to be vitally important when we try and wrestle these emissions down. And the next one is basically we don't want to bankrupt the sector or the country in the process. We think recently to the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Simon Upton's recent release, which is titled Farms, Fossil Fuels and Forests. And he goes on to conclude that agriculture and carbon emissions should be treated separately. And if biological emissions indeed are going to go into our system called the Emissions Trading Scheme in New Zealand, then that funding or tax or levy that could be struck should go back into those communities where indeed it has come from to focus on greenhouse gases, water quality and biodiversity. I implore the Commissioner for his foresight and thinking. I want to finish in a moment or two, but before I do, I just want to talk about the point of obligation, because it'll be a crude measure if biological emissions are measured at the processor level, in my opinion. Kilos of milk solids, kilos of carcass weight. It actually needs to change behaviour. It needs to be measured inside the farm gate. That's why I support farm plans. And I salute Dairy NZ, who have done 44 pilots. That information is now readily available. And the conclusion from that research is that no one size fits all. So that is the challenge that we have. A levy at the processor level will be seen as just a crude tax and won't change any behaviour. A couple of comments on 1 billion trees, because that's been a real focus in New Zealand. And yes, we need to plant more trees. I think everyone agrees in that space. But the challenge, of course, is, are the trees going to be planted in the right place? This is looking out 30 years. And what we don't want to occur is that rural schools, their roles decline, that jobs leave these rural communities, and that the local roads get smashed. So yes, more trees need to be planted, but in a very mindful way of the important infrastructure and jobs. We are leading the world, like Australia is and those countries in Europe, to do with biological emissions research. Whether it's boluses, whether it's vaccines, whether it's additives, technology is the way of the future to wrestle these emissions down, not more taxes. If we think about biotechnology, that needs to change in New Zealand. We have GE ryegrasses that have to go to the USA for field trials, and the early research is showing that that will reduce methane by 23%, and they're also more drought tolerant. We can't do those trials in New Zealand. And when we think about those in the Greens that have now in our country opposed biotechnology to wrestle predator-free down to get rid of those 30 million furry possums that we have in New Zealand. Thanks for that, Australia. Just thought I'd get that jab in. Biotech under the coalition government in New Zealand to breed sterile possums has stopped. So biotechnology is one of the key things that we need to continue to look at doing more in New Zealand. Finally, can I acknowledge our food producers from New Zealand and Australia here at this conference. Since 1980s, our farmers have been leading change. When subsidies came off, we had to do a hell of a lot of change, and it was really painful. And some have been saying to me, it feels like we're back there again now. We've got a huge amount of headwind that we need to navigate our way through. But because of the adaptation that we do inside our farm gate, I'm positive that we can get there with the right signals. So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me along this afternoon. Can we say good on you, mate, to all those food producers in the audience today? Thanks for what you do. In New Zealand, you help us build roads, hospitals and schools. And in my view, you don't get acknowledged for what you do. Kia kaha, thank you very much. Just before I introduce the next speaker, can I thank the outpouring of support that you have given our country over the Tasman since we had the very unfortunate and shocking terror attacks a couple of weeks ago. That was horrific for us to endure, and I do appreciate the number of you that have come up today to talk to me about that and pay your respects. Thank you very much. Now, it's my opportunity and pleasure to introduce Lisa Martin, who is the Head of Sustainability for Sanford Seafood in New Zealand. Lisa has a very proud background. She's very passionate. When I was the Minister about 18 months ago, I changed the law so that we could have cameras on all commercial vessels in New Zealand. Unfortunately, that's hit a couple of potholes in the road and hasn't yet been implemented, but I can say that Sanford are leading the way in this respect. And Lisa, thank you very much for your presentation to come.